Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. For anyone who doesn't know me yet, my name is Savannah and today we're going to be baking with some summer berries. I'm lucky enough to live in an area where we have lots of farmers and strawberry farms, so I'm just starting off by washing all the berries, getting off any dirt or bugs that might be on there. And I was lucky enough to find a whole flat of strawberries, so you can see I have a lot more that I'm going to be using in this recipe. I'm always surprised by how dirty the water gets after washing them, so definitely make sure not to skip that step. Processing all these berries did take a bit of time, but it was actually really relaxing and definitely worth it in the end because I was able to save a lot for smoothies and for baking, and the results were really beautiful. This first recipe calls for the classic combination of rhubarb and strawberries, and this recipe happens to be one of our family traditions in the summertime and was passed down from my grandma from one of her good friends. Rhubarb is a really lovely plant to use, and it's actually a vegetable, but it has a really nice tart flavor and it will come back year after year, so it's really low maintenance. It is fresh from the garden, so definitely make sure to wash off any dirt. I'm gonna slice these into little chunks and trying to make them about the same size as the strawberries. To a baking sheet, add 6 cups of the rhubarb and strawberry combined. And these strawberries are a little bit more liquidy because I left them in the fridge overnight. This recipe usually calls for strawberry gelatin, but I was able to find this gel dessert which has that same wiggly texture that we want, and it's from seaweed, so no animal products. We want all the fruit to be coated with the strawberry powder. This recipe is really similar to a cobbler, so we're going to start making our topping and add 3 tablespoons of vegetable oil to a bowl. To the oil, add half a cup of brown sugar and go ahead and whisk that together. We're just going to try to cream the oil with the sugar and make it nice and fluffy and light. Up next is a cup of flour as well as a teaspoon of baking powder. And just a dash of salt. Gently make a little nest in the flour, and we're going to pour in half of a cup of plant-based milk, and I'm using coconut milk here. You'll want to combine this together until it's just mixed, and making sure not to mix it too much because the gluten can get tough and we don't want that. The batter can go straight on top of the fruit, and it's going to be just kind of haphazard, filling in as much space as you can. It doesn't need to be completely covered. Next, I'm whisking together a tablespoon of potato starch and cinnamon, and this is to go on top of the topping, and it's going to make it really crispy and add a nice cinnamony flavor. So while that's happening, I'm preparing a kettle with boiling water. When the water is hot, I'm adding half a cup plus 2 or 3 tablespoons, and this is gonna help the gel become activated and start the cooking process. This should go straight into a preheated oven at 350 degrees, and after about an hour, it should come out looking like this. For the sake of filming, I didn't want to lose my sunlight, and so I cut into it before it was fully cooled, so it was a little bit runny, but just cool it all the way. It's going to be really nice and stay together beautifully. This next recipe is a wild blueberry scone with a lemon glaze and some edible calendula flowers. I started this recipe by sifting all my dry ingredients, so that's 2 cups of flour, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, a sprinkle of salt, and 1/2 cup of brown sugar. This recipe also calls for a stick of butter, or 8 tablespoons, so we're gonna go ahead and add that to the freezer to make sure it's nice and cold. Scones are all about that light and fluffy texture, so sifting it is really important to get out any clumps. To another bowl, I'm adding my wet ingredients, and this recipe I'm using 1/2 cup of coconut cream and 1/2 cup of coconut milk, as well as a teaspoon of vanilla. Keeping everything really cold is going to be important for the texture of the scone, so I'm just going to pop that back in the fridge. Hopping back over to the dry ingredients, I'm going to get my stick of butter out of the freezer and go ahead and grate that straight in. Gently mix the butter into the dry ingredients, trying to be really efficient so that it doesn't start to melt in your hands, and we're looking for sort of a shaggy texture. And then we're going to go ahead and add in our wet ingredients. To keep the berries from sinking in the dough as they cook, I'm going to sprinkle them with a little bit of flour. As the dough just starts to combine, you can go ahead and dump it out onto your counter. Gently work in any of the dry crumbs until everything is wet and it starts to combine into a big ball. At this point, you can add in about half the berries. And this recipe calls for 2 cups of wild blueberries. Don't worry if the dough isn't holding perfectly together, that's pretty normal. Just keep scooping everything back towards the middle and turning and forming it into that round shape. Once it's looking pretty well combined, you can add the rest of the berries. Once all the berries are combined, you can go ahead and start pressing it out, and we want to keep it nice and round and make it about 2 inches thick. We cut the scones like we would a pizza, first in half and then in quarters, and trying to keep the pieces as even as possible. And speaking of pizza, if you haven't seen my latest video, go ahead and check that out. And if you're enjoying today's video, think about liking and subscribing. It would really help support my channel. To help the scones maintain their shape as they bake, I'm gonna go ahead and put the whole tray into the freezer for about 15 minutes. And while those are cooling off, we can heat up the oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. And while we wait for the scones to be ready to go in, I'm gonna go ahead and make our lemon glaze. With the smallest grater that you have, you can zest half of a lemon and then add in a cup of powdered sugar. To the sugar, add in a tablespoon and a half of lemon juice and whisk that all together until there are no clumps. When the oven is heated, I'm gonna go ahead and glaze these scones with some melted butter. And after 20 minutes of baking, you can transfer them to a cooling rack. They should be nice and golden on the outside. And once they've cooled down a bit, you can go ahead and frost them with the lemon glaze. And then I sprinkled on some edible flower petals from my garden. These came out so buttery and rich, and the lemon glaze really makes them refreshing for the summer. You know, this recipe is good because I got a special stamp of approval from my grandpa.
Delicious.
Thank you all for watching today's video, and if you enjoyed it, please like and comment below, and I'd love to know what other kind of videos you'd like to see.